If I've missed any other celebrities and dignitaries, I'm sorry. They're the two I knew. Okay. Let me get on to my job as introducing our speaker. So it's my pleasure to introduce our Mullen Lecture speaker, Professor Annamaria Lusardi. Professor Lusardi is an economist who received her PhD from Princeton University. She currently has multiple hats that she wears, and that is Senior Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, Professor by courtesy of finance at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, Director of the Initiative for Financial Decision Making at Stanford University, and founder and academic director of the Global Financial Literacy Center. And she does lots of other things as well. She frequently makes presentations such as the one she'll make today around the world, and has had a major impact on advancing financial literacy education around the world. Before moving to Stanford in 2023, Professor Lusardi was at the George Washington University and at Dartmouth College, where she started her academic career. She founded and is the inaugural editor of the Journal of Financial Literacy and Wellbeing, published by Cambridge University Press. A prolific author, her Google Scholar page currently shows over 73,000 sites. And for those in the audience who are not academics, that's a really, really big number. Okay? And for those who are academics, her H index is 88 and her I-10 index is 201, which might not mean a lot to any of you. All right. And I'm happy I provided a few of those citations of the 73,000. Okay. Her most cited article is The Economic Importance of Financial Literacy, Theory and Evidence, published in the Journal of Economic Literature. It has over 7,000 sites. This was co-authored with her frequent collaborator, Olivia Mitchell, at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and the Social Security Administration, and her work is frequently cited in media outlets. She's taught courses related to personal finance and financial literacy, and perhaps she'll mention that during her talk today, of her teaching in that area. The course at Stanford is now the most highly enrolled course in the Stanford Economics Department. All right. And by the way, our Finance 150 financial literacy course offered by the Economics Department has been taught to full sections since fall of 2020. So for the students out there, I recommend Finance 150. Right? You will not be sorry. And Marianne Davenport, hi Marianne, she's the instructor, and students apparently love her and love the course. All right? She's not denying it, so it's probably true. So I could say more, but you're here to hear Professor Lusardi, not me. So her talk will be essentially for about an hour, and she will take questions as they come up. She's going to be happy to take any questions that you have, and at the conclusion, we can network and discuss this topic and have the food and drink. All right, so I said my piece, and now I'll hand it off to Professor Lusardi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here, and I want to say, first of all, thank you not only for inviting me, but for all of the students here. You know, if there is a personal finance course or a financial literacy course offered here, do take it. It's going to transform your life. Okay, so this is how I think important and impactful personal finance courses are. And the reason for, I'm actually going to give you a tour of data. I know that you might not be as passionate about data as I am, so you know, we'll go through this tour of data collection, but I'll try to make it as light as possible. And because it's so much data, I'm going to stop at several points and kind of to discuss that with you, and also make sure, you know, when you have a question, that just raise your hands and we'll discuss it together. I just want to start with why we are talking about financial literacy today, or why are we talking so much about financial literacy today, and also give what is it, I think, the main point of this presentation, okay? But But the reason why we are talking about financial literacy has not to do with crisis, or not to do with the fact that inflation has gone up and so on. It has something to do with the fact that the world has changed, and has changed in a way that has made us responsible for so many financial decisions. One is certainly the pension. If any of you had even a part-time job, I'm sure you had to deal with benefit, understanding 401ks, understanding all of this benefit, and it's very important, and they are complex, right? But it's not just that, not just changes in that part. You know, there are changes, for example, in the labor markets, the importance of STEM, and I'm so proud to be here today because I know that that's the university for, really famous for STEM, and congratulations, because that's certainly very important. My students at Stanford, they are all, the large majority, they are into STEMs. Half of our students are actually in computer science. And the big change is also the changes in the financial markets, where there are so many new instruments, and they are all complex, right? And some of them are one way in which you can increase your wealth greatly and destroy your wealth as well. And just think of fintech and AI. Now money is invisible. With a click of a button, you can make important financial decisions, right? And yet again, this is why this is even more important. So the point I would like to make is that we need a scientific approach to financial literacy. In other words, we cannot just pretend that people know it, okay? We cannot put people in charge of important and complex financial decisions and not check how much they know about this, and let them take information everywhere. I always say financial literacy today is like reading and writing. Imagine you are an illiterate person, you cannot read and write, okay? You can be as clever as you want, you're not able to navigate this world, right? This world is complex, and you need skills. You need at the minimum to be able to read and write, and today, given the importance of finance and the type of decision we all have to make, we need this additional skill, right? Common knowledge, general knowledge is not enough. And so what I would like to say, we need, first of all, to have it in the school, and not just in the elementary or high school. We also need it at this higher level, at the college level. And we need it to be as rigorous as possible. So I am going to try to answer 4 questions today, and I'm going to take a personal finance approach. I have underlined it because of the way I'm asking this question. If I were a macroeconomist, I would ask it differently, right? But these are the questions I'm going to try to ask and try to give an answer, which is, given what I've said, do people have the knowledge of this fundamental concept? In other words, do people know the ABC of finance, right? Second is, how do they use it in their financial decision, right? Trying to basically ask the question, but does this knowledge matter, right? You might not know physics and still be able to play pool, right? But in finance, ignorance is not bliss, okay? And I'm going to try to also show you what I've learned by looking at the data, and if this is the case, what can we do to really improve financial literacy and behavior? And as you can imagine, there is an important role that university can play here in terms of addressing this. Why is it a personal finance approach? If I were a macroeconomist, I would show you aggregate data and try to match that data, right? And instead, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go through surveys that we have designed to see whether people know the ABC. And I'm also going to try to look at this black box of how people make financial decisions, right? Normally, we know output, we know savings, we know investing, we know what people do, but we don't know how they do it. So I want to enter this black box and also try to make some assessment are these good or bad decisions? Right? In personal finance, we can actually say more about this, and this is actually what I'm going to try to do. And given the study and given all this data and research we have done, I'm also going to then use these suggestions from that to try to do policy and programs and teaching, which is really evidence and database. So this is to tell you why the data is so important and why I'm going to take you to a tour de force, so setting expectation about all of the data that we have been able to collect. Okay? And before I do so, let me just tell you that financial literacy now is an official field of study. Right, so maybe 20 years ago, I don't think I would have given a seminar on financial literacy, and probably there weren't courses in financial literacy, but financial literacy is a field of study. We have a GL code, a Journal of Economic Literature code, is G53. We have a journal dedicated to financial literacy, so if you study this topic, you have a place where to publish. And we also have all of the activity that every field has, conferences dedicated to these, sessions in conferences, and so on. So finally, this has achieved this status, and we can also learn a lot from the research as a consequence. Also, you can put financial literacy into a traditional model of savings. And this is actually what we did in a paper we published in the Journal of Political Economy. The reason actually why I want to tell you briefly about this is just to tell you, in case some of you think like, but does it really matter? We also did, in a sense, a simulation. We wanted to understand, but how much does this knowledge matter, right? Are we looking at something that, has a small consequence in the aggregate? Maybe it's big at the individual level, but only in a small part of the population. So much does it matter? But for the academics here, I also wanted to say it's not that financial literacy is kind of, something new that you cannot fit in. In fact, financial literacy, you can put it into just the most basic intertemporal model of savings. We did this in this JP paper, and actually what we did is a very simple introduction of financial literacy. We said financial literacy help people basically invest their wealth, and in particular help people invest their wealth in the stock market, right? So it's like financial literacy give you access to a better technology to invest, which is invest your wealth in the stock market, so you can get potentially a different return. It is higher but risky, right? So you have to take that risk into consideration. It's a very simple way, right? Financial literacy does a lot more than, by the way, affecting investment, but suppose that it only affects investment. How much does it matter? Okay? Well, we found that from 30 to 40% of wealth inequality close to retirement can actually be attributed to financial literacy. This is just to say that even if you take the most simple model and try to add financial literacy, it's not a sideshow, right? It actually is quite influential. Okay? But let me now turn to some of the 4 questions I wanted to address. Probably most of you don't write models. So let me start very basic and say, but do people know the ABC of personal finance? What I wanted to show you in this next slide are the 3 questions we have designed to measure financial literacy. I'm not going to read them, but I would like you to take a moment to read them, because these are 3 questions Olivia Mitchell and I designed more or less in 2000. They were first added to this module in 2004, when we basically faced the question, but how much do people know? Olivia and I were both working on savings. That's why I started with the saving model, and also looking at kind of pensions, decision about the future. And we saw that people who are very similar on many characteristics end up, as I mentioned in the model, with vastly different amount of wealth at retirement. So we thought, could that be that financial literacy play a role? But we couldn't answer these questions because there was no data that provided financial literacy measure and also linked that financial literacy to behavior. So we set up to measure financial literacy. And the question is, what do you ask to measure financial literacy, right? Do you ask if people know the Black-Scholes formula to price, convertible bonds, right? Or, what is it that you ask? So when we set up to do this, we were told we only had 3 questions. And we pushed back and said, no, we cannot measure financial literacy with 3 questions. It says, you only have 3 questions, right? That's a module, right? You just design 3. As a result, we spent 1 year designing these 3 questions. And if you think, oh my God, why did you come up with this? Basically, we consulted a lot of experts and also in survey methodology. And I hope it is clear from the type of question we designed that we went for the most basic concept. The first question is the simplest one, and it's trying to assess whether people can do an interest rate calculation, right, in the context of a financial decision. So again, sometimes people write to me and said, did you mean more 102 or did you mean 110? We really meant 102. It wasn't a mistake that we didn't look at this. We spent a year designing these questions, and it's because we wanted to see whether people are numerate. Interest compounding is actually a very complex concept, and if we had asked the question differently, we would have gotten a very low percentage of correct answer. Also note these are multiple choices. We don't ask people to do the calculation and give us an answer. We asked to choose one, and we also have the do not know and the refuse to answer so that people are not forced to pick an answer, okay? The second question is about knowledge of inflation, and it's a joint test of whether people know what inflation is, so we don't explain inflation, and does, right? So it's a joint test of knowledge of finance and of this concept of inflation. Because in finance, most of the decisions are about transferring sum of money over time, but over time, prices change, right? So this is, of course, a question that has become more relevant today, given that inflation has gone up in the past few years. But this is, again, supposed to be a little harder, and also this joint knowledge. The third one is the most difficult question. Is meant to measure risk diversification, and again, knowledge of whether people know what a stock and a stock mutual fund is, right? Is again testing the knowledge of finance, because finance is so complex that it has its own knowledge, right? Its own language, and so nobody is going to explain to you that language. You have to learn the language of finance, and this is actually what I tell when I start my personal finance course. We are going to learn the language of finance together, right? I don't know if you think these are easy or hard, but these were the questions that we designed to measure the ABC of personal finance. So even though 3 was an accident, right, we were forced to only have 3 questions, it turned out to be a great opportunity because actually there is room for 3 questions in every survey around the world. And so after we did the first survey, the results were so striking that everybody wanted to basically add these questions. So we have been adding them in countries around the world, which is really great because we have learned enormously from that, as I'm going to show you in a moment. And more recently, we redid another international comparison as a special issue of the inaugural Journal of Financial Literacy and Wellbeing, where we could get the data from the same countries, so we can see does financial literacy change over time. And also we have a lot more new countries, and so we can learn even more, okay? So the results are really sobering, which is that unfortunately financial literacy, even when we measure the ABC, is strikingly low, right? So you cannot take financial literacy for granted, even in the US, which is a country with, of course, advanced financial market. You cannot take it for granted even in Finland, which is a country with a very strong education system. You cannot take it for granted in countries in the G7, right? And of course it's very low in the developing economies, but in fact the results are strikingly similar. What is also similar is the group which are particularly vulnerable are the same. They are the young, women, and those with low education and income. And I'm going to come back to some of these later on. And the result, which is unfortunately very discouraging, is that across countries, we don't see any improvement in financial literacy in most of the countries, right? So financial literacy is sort of stuck at this low level, okay? Let me actually maybe see if there are any clarification questions. I have not provided the data here because I want to provide the data now on this project that we have been doing, where we extend now the measure of financial literacy to 28 questions. So give us unleash and we forget about 3, right? We actually ask, we have room, so okay, right? That's why you don't ask economists, right, for what they want, because 28 questions. But I'm going to show you the data for 28 questions. Before I do so, let me see if there are any clarification question or any other question. Or if you have if you want to ask about your favorite country, I can tell you. Let me tell you about data for about my favorite country, which is of course Italy. I hope you know I am Italian. This was not a Brooklyn accent. So unfortunately, Italy is one of the countries which has the lowest financial literacy among the G7 and even among the G20, and it's the country with the highest gender difference in financial literacy. So we hold 2 bad records, not 1. Yeah.
Yes, so in this finding you found that there are some groups that are particularly vulnerable to low financial literacy. In the terms of age, were you able to parse out if there was a particular age group while being young? Was there a decline in financial literacy and it went back up at a different age group and then right back down? I asked if there's a window of time for financial literacy, just how scholars find there's a window of time to learn a language per se.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, the reason why the young know little is because they are young, right? So, I mean, that's good, but the problem is, that the young today have to make very important decisions. So not having that knowledge, makes them vulnerable because, in the past, the young didn't have to make many decisions, but a young person today who goes to college starts with student loan, right, or all of those things. And when you go to high school, you have to make this important decision on how to finance your education. Vanderbilt last year reached the cost of $100,000 a year for a college, right? So, the cost of education has gone up faster than inflation and wage growth, right? So, young people today have to make decisions. When we look at the age, as I'm going to show you, we see normally an inverted U shape. Right? So financial literacy does increase with age, but I'm going to argue it doesn't increase a lot, right? And normally turns down, we don't know whether it's an age or cohort effect, that, the older generation didn't have to make many financial decisions. And interestingly, in the new data, we don't see this coming down, actually continues to go up. So it's kind of interesting to observe that, but it's a great question. Overall though, even across the age group, and I'm going to show the data, even when you're close to retirement and you've made many financial decisions, you seem to not have high financial literacy. So I don't think that people really learn a lot from experience. And I saw another hand, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. For the big 3 questions, my interest is about the context and country. How much of context do you see from surveys that have used other than these big 3 questions? What's it like?
So first of all, we are able, I hope I have understood your question, we have been able to add this question to national surveys ourselves, contacting central banks and so on, and other people have done this. But as you can imagine, some of these questions do not carry well, because they were really designed for countries with well-developed financial market. So in 2014, we partnered with the World Bank, and we have also a global survey for financial literacy, which is posted on our website. And you can see the ranking across 140 countries. And the question about risk diversification was actually written differently, because you cannot ask in Ghana, so do you prefer a stock or a stock mutual funds? And also the question about interest compounding is asked differently, and we have 2. So there are actually 5 questions, and they are really comparable. Across country, you can ask them across countries as well. So we have done a lot of work to do that. Okay, more questions? And I'm going to take a couple of more answers, and then we have to move on. Yeah.
Just quickly, how do you define high financial literacy and low?
Yeah, that was a great question. I'm going to take yours as well, so I'm going to answer both.
Okay. I was just wondering if you see any differences both in kind of typical responses to these questions as well as the link between ease and wealth in different welfare states,
Oh, yeah.
different types of welfare
Wow,
states.
that's awesome. Maybe we just stop here. We just talk about the big 3. How do you define high financial literacy? This is a great question, and now I've found a way to do so. You actually, if you take the number of people who can answer all the 3, you at least can differentiate those who have this basic knowledge, and it's highly predictive. So I highly recommend, rather than taking the number, for example, per se the number of questions that people answer, doing a dummy for whether you're able to answer all 3, because then it is seen, it's basically you have this basic knowledge, right? And to your point, it's strongly linked to wealth. And what we see, by the way, is that there is it's predictive of wealth, it's predictive of other behavior, and if you feel, we see that it's low, but also very wide, it's unequally distributed in the population, right? In a way that I think is going to make wealth inequality be even bigger now, because with knowledge you can really make better financial decisions. Okay, let me actually tell you about the PFIN index, because I think you'll have even more questions for those, and I'll be back to ask or also take questions about the big 3 in case we haven't done it. So in 2016, we partnered with the TIA Institute. This is the pension fund for the education industry, and they are a non-for-profit. And so we designed a question which we call the Personal Finance Index, where we now have questions about all of the decisions that people make. So we really want to have a comprehensive measure of personal finance. We collect the data each year in January. And each year, by the way, we added also even though the 28 questions that we design are going to be kept the same, we can add information, so we can test different hypotheses and so on. And each year also we have oversampled a specific group, so we can look at a specific group in the population. And also more recently we have looked at other topics as well, like retirement fluency and things like this. As I mentioned, we have 28 questions. We are now unrestricted and we went for it, right? So we have 3 or 4 questions for each of these topics. What are the topics? Well, we have used the Council for Economic Education, National Standard for Financial Literacy. And so these are the topics that we think people, in a sense, make decision of, and we ask questions about each of them, right? So to measure, again, their personal finance knowledge. What do we ask? Here is the example of a question, right? So what you'll see is that we are asking whether people have an understanding of this basic concept and whether they can apply it, right? So this is a question about basically interest compounding, right? Do people know that if you get the money and if you have money early on, right, this is more valuable than money later on, right? And so we don't ask people to make fancy calculation, right? But we ask whether they understand, in a sense, how interest compounding works, okay? And again, even though in the US we ask people to plan for retirement, the finding is that only half of the population is able to answer this question, and 1 in 4 Americans who actually do not know that if you have money early on, it's basically more valuable and you'll have more later on, okay? This is actually very much the finding in the whole population, that overall people can answer about half of these questions. And I'm pretty sure, by the way, if you are one of my students and you only answer half of my question in the test, you don't get a B- or a C, you get an F. Okay, you have to answer at least 70% of the question to have of the quiz to have a passing grade, right? So this is not a passing grade, and we can also look at the distribution, right? That there is a good proportion of the population who cannot even answer 7 of these 28 questions, even though, again, the questions are questions about everyday life financial decisions, right? We don't ask about whether you're able to price a convertible bond, right? But we ask whether you are able to understand this basic concept, and including in here are the big 3. Let me give you a little bit more information, then I'll take questions. Unfortunately, like the big 3, this is not improving over time. And if any, the group of the population who are not able to answer even the big 3 seem to be increasing over time. So we are not making much progress. And also, if you look at the topics that people know the least, they are disproportionately the topic related to risk and risk management. And this is actually very similar to the big 3. So I have to say, we have 28 questions, but it turns out that the big 3 were already telling us that. So, if you don't have a lot of room or a lot of space, the big 3 are actually a really good way to measure financial literacy. And from now on, even though I have this rich data, I'm going to actually use the big 3 disproportionately, because they are a good way to basically test and measure knowledge. The other thing I wanted to show you, and these are 2 groups I care a lot about. So to your question, if you look at the young, right, they know less, right? And not surprisingly, right, people have not made many decisions, but the problem is if you look at people close to retirement, it's not that they do this decision with a lot of knowledge. Even people close to retirement who have made many decisions don't seem to have that advanced knowledge. And, and certainly this group, as you can see here, there are a lot of people who cannot even answer 7 questions, but this is a group we deal with every day. These are my students, and so clearly we can, certainly address financial literacy for this group of students. And I would like to argue that the university must address this, because we cannot ask students to take up the type of student loan that they are taking up today when they don't even know what an interest rate is. It doesn't benefit them, and it doesn't benefit us. We want them out of our basement. Okay? The other thing I really care about is gender difference in financial literacy. In the US, there is a 10 percentage point gender difference in financial literacy. In Italy, it's a little higher. Italy, overall in the world, we have a 5 percentage point gender difference in financial literacy. In Italy, it's 3 times that high. But it's very persistent, and I have to tell you, there is a gender difference in almost every country around the world. The country that don't have it is because also the level of knowledge of men is low enough. It's not that women are so much more knowledgeable, right? So there is something really strong about this gender difference, and it's so strong that I'm actually going to tell you about the study we did about that, okay? So let me tell you this, and then we stop and take questions. Okay, so where do the women know less? Interestingly, almost every topic. Right, there is, and when you don't see a large difference, it's because also the men do not know a lot more, right? And again, investing, insuring is hard for everybody, okay? But is it that women are wrong in answering these questions, right? And I can already see somebody figuring out what's going on here, and yes, that's what is going on, which is women disproportionately say, I do not know about this question. So women do not know, but they know they do not know, right? So there is something good about actually, this financial literacy of women. I've often argued that because of this characteristic, women are ideal, suited for make financial decisions, right? Because they are potentially a lot more aware of, what they know and they do not know, and they are also aware that they might have to improve their financial knowledge, and I'm very glad to see all of these women present here today, okay? So then, in a sense, what we are doing is not completely right? because we are giving a value of 0, right, to somebody who doesn't answer correctly, right, but perhaps they know, right? So we did this experiment using a Dutch data. In fact, actually, interestingly, we have worked with many countries around the world, and we have been able, now we design our own survey, but in the past, we were able to use national surveys. So what we did here, we asked the big three, and then 6 weeks later, we ask the big three again, but we take away the do not know option. And we force people to answer, right? And then we ask how confident are you on the answer. So what do we discover? That women, right, knew the answer about the question, not as much as men, but normally they know the answer, but they are not confident about the answer. They're not sure 100%. By the way, I see this in my classroom as well. I ask a question and I see all of the hands go up, and normally they are not my female student. And then I ask the female student and they give me the right answer. And I said, well, you did know, but why didn't you raise your hands? Because I wasn't sure, right? In other words, you know, there is a confidence element here that if women are not 100% sure, they don't want to venture into this, right? In other words, you know, we cannot give a weight of 0 and 1, so we actually do an estimator here where we estimate the optimal weight to give to this answer, given that women, in a sense, know a little bit of that answer, right? They are not just completely confident about it. And we actually discovered that 1/3 of that gender difference can be attributed to confidence, right? And we actually had called this paper Fearless Woman. Remember Fearless Girl, right? In a sense, this paper really talks about that, and I think there is evidence that we do need to tell the women to be less fearful, right? And our data shows that, you know, both lack of knowledge and lack of confidence are actually predictive of women not investing in the stock market, right? So, and it's not just knowledge, it's also confidence, right? So, yet again, for example, you know, this can be important for when you teach your personal finance, right? Not many women sometimes show up in the course because they think, you know, this is a hard course, very boring, very mathematical, not for them, right? And I tell my students, particularly in the first class, you know, that this is a class for everybody. It's not just about investing, right? In fact, I tell them this course is a happiness project, right? It really helps you to make decisions that probably make you be happy about, you know, what you can do. By the way, we didn't call it Fearless Woman or Fearless Girl because Fearless Girl is traded, so, you know, we couldn't use it. But just to tell you that I am probably the only person who has written a paper about the statue, right? But it's, I think it's relevant and I think it's important. So let me stop for a moment and take questions. Yeah.
So could some of this difference also be explained by the roles within a family? So
Yeah.
if one of the couple is doing a certain work, maybe
Yeah.
the other one is
Yeah.
disinterested in listening.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, so the division of labor within the family is another very important explanation. We have looked into this, and there are papers that shows that explains some of it, but not everything. So for example, you see a gender difference even in young people, in single people, right? And it doesn't explain all of that gender gap. So interestingly, I have to say, we are not able, if we take even all of the explanation, we are not able to explain all of the gender difference in financial literacy. So it's, you know, that's why at the end we said it's norm and culture, right? But we don't precisely know what is it, right? And so many traditional explanations do something, but not the whole thing, and certainly not across countries. And this is why it's also interesting to study the international evidence, right? Yeah.
When people get older and the literacy rate goes down, have you been doing it for enough years that you know it actually goes down, or that they were just lower earlier in their lives too?
Yeah, so it's very hard to distinguish the age and cohort effect. And we cannot follow people over time. You know, we don't have a lot of panel data. Even our data is not panel, so we are not following the same people over time. So we do, but the evidence seems to suggest that there are both an age and cohort effect, right? As people age, you know, the memory, the cognitive abilities, they kind of go potentially down. And there are several papers now that shows that people, you know, older people are also subject to scams and so on, and that can be part of this. Other things we also see is that, you know, older generation didn't have to make this type of decision. So if you think that financial literacy is an endogenous variable, you choose how much to invest in literacy. Those older generation didn't have to do as much about that, right? But I think, you know, today, for example, we speak a lot with financial advisors and so on, because they really are afraid, you know, when we see our clients showing sign of, you know, mental decline, what do we do, right? So actually lawyer and financial advisor are working together on trying to address this, because it can have important implication, and people can lose a lot of wealth as well. I saw a hands over here and then here, yeah.
So, I would like you to say a little bit about your categories. So you talked about borrowing and so on. It seems to me like there could be some question about what goes in each category.
So sometimes it's difficult to differentiate, right? You know, the question I measured before, you know, is a question about saving, but it could be also related, you know, to perhaps another topic. We try to be, you know, it's not that here, you know, we want to have a very, you know, deep characterization, right? We wanted to capture the knowledge, right, of those topics, right? And so this is why we have also characterized this in this way, right? But, you know, I think you can even group them, in a sense, in a bigger way. And also almost coming back to the big three, frankly, right? And you would find the same result. That when you look at the very basics, you know, people have the basic. When you look at risk, this is where the knowledge really, you know, becomes much less. Yeah.
During the research, did you find anything particularly surprising or notable that led to the distinction in why somebody would be more or less financially literate?
Sorry, tell me, I couldn't hear the first part of the question.
Oh, in your research, was there anything that stood out to you in particular that made somebody more or less financially literate?
Yes, certainly. I'm actually, let me come back to this and I'll show you.
Okay.
When we look at the people, in particular the young people, what predicts being financially literate, right? As you can see here, age is an important factor, right? I mean, a young person I know is not normally literate, right?
Understandable.
Gender, but I'm going to tell you more in a moment. And that's actually what I think makes it so important to have it in the school. So let me delay this just for a moment, and I wanted to talk more about what we found. And here we are actually. So I'm glad you asked. So we were able to do a study in 2008 and 9, where we look at the financial literacy of young people, which are young millennial, 23 to 28 years old, right? And actually here we have truly panel data, because we were able to add this question in the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. And we are able to connect the financial literacy of those people to when they were growing up, to when they were 12 to 17 years old, right? And what we also know is a lot about them, including, for example, the wealth of the parents as told by the parents, okay? So in this young group of people, first of all, the percentage of people who are financially literate is very small, not even 30% when we look at the big three. And who are they? They are disproportionately white, male, from college-educated family, who had retirement saving and stocks when these young people were growing up, when they were 12 to 17. In other words, what have we learned from here is that people learn about financial literacy at the dinner table, right? But only if you have parents that talk to you about these topics, right? And this is why I think it's very important to have this topic in college or in high school, because many people might not have this exposure. And if you are in this category, right, if you are a female, if you are not white, and if you are not from a rich family, you might actually not be able to acquire much financial literacy, right? So it's also a question, I think, about inequality. Okay, so
Can I-
that, yeah.
I'm wondering if big events like financial crisis
Right.
in 2007 and 8 would change this situation. And because when the the financial crisis happened, everybody got hit, and maybe people was pressed to learn more financial
We
knowledge.
thought that too. We thought that too, but if you look over time, this is why we wanted to collect data each year. If you look over time, you don't see this blip as much, right? And I think it's because where do you learn it, right? It's not, we have not made it very easy to learn about financial literacy, right? And so, again, right, I think if we want to see changes at the aggregate level, we need policy changes. Left to themselves, maybe people go and learn on TikTok, right? And laugh, right? So, or read, like, they read the Wall Street Journal, but the Wall Street Journal doesn't really explain interest compounding, right? So, that's why, like you, we were expecting this, but we don't see a trend. In fact, some of the trends seem that financial literacy is going down, and I think it's because of the change in the population, frankly, not in the change in knowledge. Okay, so now,
I just had a
yeah,
question.
sorry.
So, due to the age difference of how much financial literacy a person has, would that be related to how much income the person earns? Because as they grow older, they are under retirement, so their income is not as much in their
Absolutely.
prime ages. And
Yeah, absolutely. No, in fact, this is, this is, let me go back. So this is also the prediction of the JPE paper. So you're absolutely right. If you read that paper, there is an incentive to acquire financial literacy as as you move on in life, and in particular if you have an upward sloping income profile, you have to save for your own retirement, then you invest in that. So, in a sense, this behavior is almost optimal, right? It's not that, it's not, but the problem is, this level are so low that, we would like, and so unequally distributed, right? That perhaps we would like to cure that, right? It's going to be very expensive for a minority to achieve financial literacy, right? And maybe, do we want to say, what? Sorry, that's life, right? Some people are born with rich parents and some not. Live with it, right? Well, maybe, we do want to provide a better access to that education, right? Yeah, so that's a great question. Okay, let me take you to another data set and then we are done with data, right? But one of the things that none of this data was able to tell us is, do people use this knowledge, right? And I want to now to take you to Europe, and we have 10 countries. We work with the European Central Bank, and finally here we were able to see, okay, now we look at Europe, all of these like French people, all these Italian people, how are they doing in financial literacy? And the other thing is, what do people do, in a sense, when faced with different interest rate, right? What in this period in Europe, the European Central Bank had to sharply increase the interest rate because of the high inflation. So we could see, we asked people, okay, when the interest rate is high, is it a good time to borrow, right? And when the interest rate is high, is it a good time to have an adjustable mortgage rate, right? And things like this, and you can see now the answer if you have a low financial literacy versus high financial literacy, which are just measure if people are able to answer the big three. What I'm trying to do here, this is just descriptive, but I'm trying to see, do people that are financial literacy also use it in making these decisions, right? Do they understand, the interest rate is the price of money, and if the interest rate is high, potentially that's not the great time to borrow, okay? So just a quick thing about this data. We have 10 countries, and here, look at that, right? Gender difference in financial literacy in Europe as well. The home shape profile in terms of age, so it's there everywhere. And again, this relationship I've shown you, like with respect to education and income, right? People have different financial literacy, which by the way is optimal, right? The problem is optimal, it seems to be very unequal, but you know, from a theoretical, from a model point of view, that's the optimal way to do this. And also you see the difference in Europe for financial literacy. This is the proportion of the big three, not the other questions. And here you can see that countries that have a robust education system are potentially more likely to be financially literate. So let me show you, for example, just the difference in answer to the question, how willing are you to take risk, right, for higher return? Okay? People with low financial literacy are not willing to take any risk, right? Why? And I think to me this is another story about the big three, right? People do not understand risk, they don't know what risk is. And so if you ask, are you willing to take risk? No. Right? Did you get up from the bed this morning? Did you drive to work? Because you are taking some risk. Right? Interestingly, some of these people are investing in the market. You feel like, did you know that you are taking some risk? And look at the difference in financial literacy. Right? I mean, if you have no financial literacy, like, your answer is, I'm not taking any risk. Right? So important. Look at how people are shopping for that, this is my favorite graph, but I went too far. Shopping for the best debt product. People take a day to search for the best fridge, right? And then they actually choose the mortgage in 20 minutes, right? I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's really true. People don't do any search, almost, when they look at financial decisions. You know how many people go and buy a car and they actually have the loan at the car from the car dealer, right? Which is probably not the most advantageous thing to do. Or people don't search for the best interest rate on the mortgage, right? And again, there is a big difference if you have literacy or no financial literacy. And unfortunately, I think financial illiteracy is regressive. It's the people who could benefit the most from searching that actually do the least of the searching. Right? Here I'll tell you two of my favorite graphs. Too fast. So during this period, January 2022 to 2024, the European Central Bank increased inflation a lot to fight inflation. You can see the step they took, and it went up and up and up and up. So we asked people, if the interest rates are high, is it a good time to borrow? And is it a good time to save? Look at the borrowing. The people with high financial literacy, right? When the interest rate is low, it's a good time to borrow, but as interest rates go up, right? The good time to borrow, of course, went down. That's not the case for the low financial literacy, right? It stays, almost the same. You can argue these people are liquidity constrained. I'm not arguing that, I'm not testing a theory. But here what I'm trying to say is that we don't see the type of behavior, according to a personal finance decision, right? And if you look here, is it a good time to save when the interest rate go up? As you know, in theory, we have an income and a substitution effect. You remember that? But, for the high financial literacy, if the interest rate go up, they seem to think, more than the low financial literacy, that they are less sensitive to the interest rate, right? And I even wonder, do people know what an interest rate is, right? And some of our evidence shows that they really don't take the interest rate as, the main price to consider. Then if you look at the adjustable rate mortgages, and we ask what is the best mortgage you should take, right? Here is the high financial literacy people. As the interest rate go up, they say no, the adjustable rate mortgage is not the best strategy. For the people instead with low financial literacy, they would choose adjustable rate, fixed rate mortgages no matter what, right? Probably because it's an easier instrument to understand, and probably because for them it might also be the best instrument to use because they can predict the payment, right? But again, if you start at the mortgage with a high interest rate, that can also be not very beneficial, right? So, let me then turn this is the process, like how do people make decision, right? They don't search very much, right? They might actually use financial instruments that are expensive, right? And they, seem to be extremely risk averse, right? So I'm going to show you how does financial literacy affect behavior, right? And before I do so, let me see if there are any questions. Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any questions, or if you're gonna have any questions going forward, looking at cryptocurrency and how people are investing. Because I know there've been, Mifi did some presentations this year about cryptocurrency and populations of mostly BIPOC young people who had never engaged in anything related to investing, didn't really know much about it, and had exceedingly high numbers of participation, because you can go to Cash App, or you can go to, a place that's selling gas and get cryptocurrency. So it's kind of opening doors for people in a way that had been closed off in the past.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was a question you might have in the future, or
Yeah, so
something you looked
unfortunately,
at.
we have not asked these questions. We don't have this in the data, and we don't have also other things like, buy now, pay later,
Yeah.
and so on.
Mhm.
So we hope to add those questions later on, because as you said, these instruments are now much more used, and we are afraid that they are also, it's very tricky that they are also used by, young people.
Without
right?
education.
And also that this is the first thing they do.
It is.
Right, and actually, if you look at the data from the National Financial Capability, for example, we see that a lot of people, young people,
Mhm.
use alternative financial services a lot. So
Yeah.
rather than they using banks, right,
Mhm.
but also for a variety of reasons. So this can be very important, but we don't have unfortunately data on that. So we don't
I
have
was
any
curious.
guidance.
Yeah, I missed
Yeah.
the first few minutes, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Thank you.
I was curious about the fixed rate versus the adjustable rate mortgage and the low financial literacy people. Since the financial crisis, the housing crisis was largely, I think, balloon payments, and so on,
Yeah.
hitting low financial literacy people. Could that steady fixed rate be an artifact of,
Yeah.
we were burnt once, we're not doing that again?
No, for sure. And also, I'm not going to argue, I think if I could sit down and write a model of rationality for that, right? So I'm not going to argue that's necessarily rational. I'm just going to argue it might be expensive, right? That, you are setting, the interest rate were really increasing quite a lot, right? So, did you really know, in a sense, that perhaps, setting for that adjustable rate mortgage at that high level? The other really, I think, simple explanation is that people might prefer the adjustable rate mortgages because, the fixed rate mortgages because they know the payment, right? And, if you are under a strict budget constraint, that might be what you really want to do. The problem is it's an expensive choice, right? In a context of high rate. And also, again, this seems to go in the direction, though, that we are also seeing, which is people are not, do they really take interest rate into account, right? They don't even search for the best interest rate, right? Which is probably not the greatest idea. Yeah,
If everybody was financially literate, how
what would happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love it. And I think we should try to answer this question. We haven't done it, explicitly in the way you are really asking. But my expectation is that, again, the general equilibrium might be different, right? Because then, so many things would change, including the interest rate. So I don't want to venture to give you an answer on something that I have not done, but I think, I would expect people to probably potentially pay lower cost, and I think there might be lower cost to individual and to society, but I don't want to venture because the general equilibrium can be very important. Somehow I would have a preference for living in a world where there is more financial literacy, because I would expect also lower inequality. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
It is for your slide. How do you define financial resilience and well-being? How
Yeah,
does that
in a
differ?
moment I'm going to show you. Yeah. So I'm going to define for you financial resilience, but before I do that, let me actually talk about a new question we have added in the survey, the Tiffin index in the last 3 years. And I actually think of this as a little bit of a measure of the cost of illiteracy. We ask people how many hours they spend dealing with and thinking about issue and problem related to personal finance. It's an encompassing measure, right? I'm not just saying how much time you spend taking care of your, or your balances or so on, but also thinking about, right, and worrying about this. If you read the statistics, by the way, about the psychology, the Psychological Association, it says that 60% of Americans suffer from financial anxiety, which I thought was really high. But when we look at this number, we were shocked, right? To see that on average, people spend 8 hours dealing and worrying about their personal finances, 4 of which are at work, right? And I love this graph because I tell my students, look, at least one advantage of taking this course is that you'll spend less time dealing with finance. You should spend your time dealing with fun things, not worrying about and thinking about your finances. I mean, clearly, right? And look at these people with low financial literacy, right? I mean, which seem to indicate as well that, if you are not financially literate, chances are that you are not making good decisions and you have to spend a lot of time worrying potentially about your finances and so on, right? Again, this is just an indication of the potential cost, or it's not just a cost in terms of finances, but it's also a cost in terms of time. Okay? But let me turn now to a question. I want to measure, does financial literacy affect behavior? And I'm going to choose not a complex one, like investing in the stock market, but I'm going to choose one which I think is basic, always recommended in a personal finance course, which is make provision for uncertainty. By the way, everybody, even animals do it, right? Think of the squirrel, right? So it's a good thing to do, like make provision for bad times, right? And there are many things you cannot buy and insure for, right? Your old fridge, it's really expensive to insure the old fridge, right? Or if the car breaks down, the insurance might not cover it, if your child needs braces, or if you have a medical expense, the out-of-pocket in the US are really high, right? So we ask these questions, and this actually is a question I worked with Peter Tufano. I visited HBS in 2009, 2010. It was just after the financial crisis, and we wanted to understand how much the financial crisis had affected the resources of individuals. So note what we ask here. We don't ask people, do you have $2,000? Do you have $2,000 in your checking account? We ask people, could you come up with $2,000 if something happened, right? And how would you come up with that? Because that's actually what financial literacy is about, right? Being able to actually, bring resources if you need them, okay? And we consider these people who cannot come up with $2,000, by the way, in a month, not today, right? If you have a time to come up with $2,000 because you have unexpected expenses, can you do it? Let me show how this financial fragility moves over time. Okay, in 2009, at the wake of the financial crisis, half of Americans would not have been able to come up with $1,000. This is how much the US was hurting, right, because of the financial crisis. It really depleting the resources of people, because it touched upon one of the assets that most households have, which is the house, which was also an asset they were using to, in a sense, deal with many things because of the home equity line of credit. So, they were also using a little bit as a liquid measure. As the economy was doing better, so in 2008, for example, these were 10 years with no crisis, right? The economy was doing very well in 2008. The stock market was high and the unemployment was very low. But even an economy doing well doesn't lift our boats. And even when the economy does well, there is almost 1/3 of the population who cannot come up with $2,000, right? And here is January 2020, right? This is the time when the stock market is at an all-time high and unemployment is at an all-time low. Unfortunately, we were on the verge of declaring the epidemic, right? The pandemic. So at this time, 26% of Americans would not have been able to deal not just with the pandemic, but with a small shock, right? And also the pandemic told us that the traditional method of dealing with shock, which in the US is you ask your family and friends, you do more work, are not useful when the economy shuts down. If the economy shuts down, people, cannot work, and probably your family and friends are doing as bad as you are, right? So, and as you can see, interestingly, now we are recovering, but in fact, financial fragility stay quite stuck. Now, you can argue, of course, there are lots of reasons why people don't have liquidity. They have low income, they have been hit by shocks. There are lots of reasons, and we account for as many reasons as possible. But as you can see, there is almost this very clear relationship with financial literacy, very monotonic. And when you account for all of these other reasons, we still find that financial literacy play a role. And because, as she has correctly argued, and you too, that financial literacy is endogenous, then I'm also using as kind of a more exogenous measure of financial literacy, where people are exposed, were offered financial education, not that they took it, so it's a more exogenous variable. And as you can see, it always predicts being financially secure, being financially resilient. Again, this is the most basic. It's not that you have to be super financially, in a sense, sophisticated. This is not like investing in the stock market, but financial literacy plays a role even in this day-to-day, and certainly highly recommended personal finance decision. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing and then take questions. You were able to publish this paper in a journal of accounting. And I cannot tell you how proud I am to have published, first of all, in a journal outside my field. And I have to tell you that when I was a kid, I wanted to be an accountant. But people didn't think it was like a flashy thing to do. And then when I grow up, I discovered that the accountants are paid the most, even beyond the finance professor. So I was right to wanting to be an accountant, and this is my recommendation to you. If you don't know which topic to choose either STEM or to be an accountant. Here is the personal finance suggestion. But let me take questions, because now I'm eager to tell you what we can do. I'm sure we are well beyond time, right? But we finish at 5:30, correct? No, we should finish at 5? 5:30, okay. Okay, right.
Hi, so going back to the personal finance question that you had regarding the $2,000, had you considered adjusting that for inflation going forward?
Yeah. Yes, we are very aware that there is this problem. We didn't do this for the following reason. The $2,000 really didn't mean 2,000, meaning we wanted to capture a mid-size shock.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So, for example, there is an SCF, a survey consumer finances question, which asks, can you come up with $400 now? Right? We really didn't mean like $2,000 that way. So it's obvious that $2,000 here are more. So like some of this decline is because $2,000 is now easier to get,
right?
But the fact is that makes this point even stronger,
yes.
Which is even though $2,000 today are so much less, right? It still doesn't go that down, right? So but well taken, right? And that's a great comment.
Dr. Lusardi, have you or anyone else studied the sectors of the economy that benefit from poor financial literacy?
Yeah, no, we haven't, and it's hard to say, but I would say you know, I don't know, in the current world, I don't think you can fool people repeatedly, right? And so, you know, but I do think that many things in finance are opaque, right? And so there are things you don't see, right? But, and that's where I think probably we should look at, right? I mean, all this complexity sometimes might just hide the fact that, you know, it's so hard to understand. Or look at the fees for the mutual funds, right? You know, people should really buy index stock. There is very little evidence that that the managed fund outperform the index stock, right? But many fees are really hidden, right? But yeah, we haven't looked at this carefully. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Can you go back to the slide? Some research finding about when a young age, 23 to 28. I just want to understand the parentheses, because there's two ages, 22 to 28, and then again 12 to 17. I think I know what it is, but can you go over that second bullet once more?
Yeah. Stop me when. Is this one?
Yeah.
Oh, this one. Is this paper?
Yes, that's it.
Yes.
The second bullet. I just
Yeah.
want to understand the parentheses a
Yeah.
little clear.
So, yeah, thank you. I probably was not clear enough. So we actually follow people over time here. So we have people that are 23 to 28, and I can link their information to when they were 12 to 17, 10 years ago. And I can, so, you know, I have asked this question in 2008, but, you know, I can go back to them 10 years earlier when they were teenager, and I can link the information that the parents told me, not themselves. And so this is why I can link to the fact that, you know, these people who are now, you know, millennials, in a sense, their financial literacy, you can link it to when they were teenagers. And because you have asked this question, there is a big recommendation I want to give you, all of you. By the way, as a personal finance professor, I don't give any financial advice, apart from being an accountant, but one of the things I really would like to recommend is that talk to your children about finance. Is absolutely important, and you are really, you know, and it's not that you have to teach them, but I think you have to make them comfortable about this topic. It makes a huge difference, and one of the things I've also noticed, I have interviewed a lot of famous people in finance, always, you know, there is always a story about the experience they had as a young people. This is what made them go into finance, right? So again, it's really important and fundamental. Okay, so let me turn about solution, and I'm going to try to be potentially quick, so we can also have conversation about it. So, you know, financial literacy, by the way, affects a variety of behavior, not just planning, but more. So what can we do given this problem? By the way, if you think that financial education doesn't work, we have done a meta-analysis of all of the work on financial literacy and found that financial education is effective and interestingly affect both the young and the old. So you can do financial education in many ways. So this is why we have also designed financial education in the workplace, and this is one example in which you can do workplace financial education. But I would like to turn to a topic that I'm more passionate about, which is teaching financial literacy in school. And let me remind you that, you know, PISA, which is the Program for International Student Assessment, done by the OECD, which measure the knowledge, the topic that young people 15 years old need to have in order to be successful in the labor market. They have added financial literacy into those topics back in 2012, right? So in a sense, we had a strong recommendation to do so. So, you know, we have been teaching personal finance at GW since 2012, and I've used a lot of the data. The course is very evidence-based, and we also are very paying a lot of attention to gender differences. At Stanford, financial literacy started in 2020 It has been an extremely popular course. We teach more than 400 students. We have a cap which we had to raise 5 times, and unfortunately we cannot find a classroom large enough to teach all of the students. So we have been teaching in the spring and in the summer. The interesting things is we also have a personal finance lab run by students. And one of the things we found extremely amazing is that 25% of our students are first generation. They become the biggest ambassador of financial literacy. You give financial literacy to these people, they want to bring it to their parents, they want to bring it to their communities, they want to bring it outside of the classroom. And they are really amazing. And so we have a lab where the students teach others and under our supervision. And also, a lot of our students are athletes. So during the summer, I had half of the football player. I also wanted to show you how I measure up. I look like a midget when you look at these people. And these are actually professional football players. I still look like a midget. Look at that. So actually at GW, we did a program for football player, and at lunch today, we discussed this a lot, and the reason is I wrote a paper about football player going bankrupt. So these are people that get all of their wealth, unfortunately, when they are young, right? So all of the wealth, by the way, the wealth they get is the equivalent of the wealth that people get in a lifetime, and in fact is even higher. And the problem is, not only they don't use it well, but they go bankrupt, right? And so we are doing program for them, and we are really great that we have all of these football players in the classroom. And at Stanford, we have really an ecosystem related to financial literacy. We run a seminar series. We have a conference dedicated to teaching personal finance. I'm going to tell you in a moment. We have a conference dedicated to research in personal finance. And so we are really engaging almost everybody. And let me tell you in particular about the Teaching Personal Finance Conference that we organize every year, where we bring together all of the people who are teaching personal finance from the Ivy League to the community colleges, so that we can exchange ideas, and we are creating a network. And so we are very happy to add the people here who are teaching personal finance, so we can continue to improve and also try to provide courses that are really suited for the student, and also try to attract as many students as possible. Because of the generosity of one of our alum, we have launched this initiative, which is the Initiative for Financial Decision Making. It's actually a collaboration between 3 institutions. CPER, which is the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, which is like the policy school, the business school, and the econ department. And our objective is to really transform personal finance education. And we are very happy to do project. We are collaborating with a variety of universities to test the effectiveness of financial education. And we are open to collaboration and to short visit as well. But to really make a difference, as you see, these statistics are really stuck. We also need to engage with the policymaker. So, there are national strategies for financial literacy around the world now, very much also pushed and supported by the OECD. And there are many things you can do for those national strategies to really promote financial literacy, and one of the big ones is to make financial education mandatory in school. So I was actually chairing the education committee in Italy that designed the national strategy for financial literacy. I'm going to show you a picture here with our president, President Mattarella, which is our hero. It was a great honor to meet him. I also wanted to show you in the palace in which he lives. Right? I mean, that's beautiful, no? Everything in Italy is a bit like that. And so we actually were able to promote a law that made financial education mandatory in school. And that's very important because, as I mentioned, Italy is one of the countries with the largest gender difference in financial literacy and one of the lowest level of financial literacy among 15 years old. and we are evaluating now the effect of this policy. We have also talked to a lot of central bankers and Minister of Finance. Last February, we were invited to the meeting of the European country, meeting of the governor, of the central bank governor and finance minister. So we spoke in front of 27 of them. And we have a presentation, by the way, which we just did at the European Central Bank, which is why should central bank care about financial literacy, and hope that they can become as well a supporter of this policy. And we are also very happy that the World Economic Forum now has also embraced financial literacy, and we hope to work with them to really elevate this topic to the thought leader. Let me summarize in a sense what are the main findings, right? That financial literacy is too low, given that today we are in charge of making financial decisions. And to make changes, we need changes at the policy level, in addition to the individual level, but education in school and college really plays an important role. And I want to leave you with this image, my final image. A lot of people ask me what's the definition of financial literacy. And if I would like, to leave you with an image of financial literacy, when I think about it, many things play a role to make our financial decision. Clearly, education, income, the structure of the financial markets, policy. But financial literacy is essential, right? I think of it like a water in an ecosystem, right? We need financial literacy to be able to grow and flourish. Thank you very much. Also, because we are nerd enough, we have also written a summary of this work. So for those of you who would like to read about a summary of this literature in a very simple way, this is an article we published recently, and this is approachable to everyone, even if you don't have a PhD in economics. Yeah.
You tease out how confidence plays for gender. Have you looked at how it plays for race and if there's some intersectionality?
Absolutely. So so there is a huge difference in race, and as you can imagine, as I've mentioned, white and Asian are disproportionately more financial literacy than Hispanics and African Americans. And it's very hard to explain that difference, meaning it's not just education and income and so on, right? So there is, again, a lot that can be done for that, and there is even like a difference across, in some countries across language and so on, but the racial difference is very stark.
I was wondering more about the confidence piece though, like the part.
Yeah, we weren't able to do this because we did it in the Netherlands and the sample is too small. Even if we had done in the US, we would have needed a high sample, a large sample, because we are looking at specific subgroup than the gender, right? So we need a very large sample to look at this. But it would really be good to see, is it true across? I would say it might carry through across there as well, because interestingly, we see a gender difference in every country, right? So it's a very persistent finding, but some group might be different, and I think it would be worth studying more. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll take this and then Maria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, for me, I've seen you establish gender gap, you then establish age gaps as well in this financial literacy, and she just talked about the race. Was there any paper or work going on regards with geography as far as the urban, rural gaps in financial literacy?
So yeah, absolutely. There are also big geographic distinction and other distinction. By the way, income and education is another one. In our report, we wrote a report for the global survey, has a little bit more on that. So we wrote a report, is posted on our website, and you can also see where is financial literacy particularly low, right, across countries, right? And as you can imagine, of course, it is very linked to the level of development, right? Also because, again, some of these questions also measure, your ability to read and write well, right? So, we don't expect Ghana, right, to be potentially higher financial literacy, but there are some surprising results. For example, Mongolia, stood out as a country with high financial literacy, and some other countries which actually implemented some sharp financial system reforms, right? So there can be, when you look at the world, you can really have important differences and maybe important changes to look at, and this is why, I think it's important to have a global perspective when you look at this topic, because financial literacy is important everywhere, right? Not just in the US. Aria.
So when you measure the effect of courses on financial literacy, are you able to follow the students over time, or how do you measure it, and how big is the effect?
Yeah, so when you look at this study, this is actually a meta-analysis. So we are not able, it's not a study we did ourselves, right? But we put together all of the studies that have been done, right? Very few are able to have a long panel, but let me tell you, for example, of the study by Carly Urban, which has looked at financial education in high school, right? She compares states that made financial education mandatory with the state who didn't, and then she linked it, there are credit records, right, in those states, and so she can see whether people who took a course or are in a state that mandated financial education, are these young people less likely to have problem with credit? And that's actually what she found. Normally these things are not very long, and I think the big question today is how long or how long lasting are the effect of financial education, right? And we don't have long enough panels. We have actually a paper in which we try to teach people about the big three, and we do it with a simple video, 3 minutes video, right? And when we have hired unemployed actor in LA, and so because actually it's hard to do a good video, and to and the story is quite elaborate, but it's only 3 minutes. And so we teach that way because we want you to do it for workplace, right? So when you try to reach people outside of the classroom, how do you reach them? So we did these videos, and then we did the experiment, and we exposed some to the video and other not, and we did it with this online survey. And interestingly, we find that even a 3 minutes video had an effect on financial knowledge, and it persisted even 8 months later, right? So, but again, this is not very long time, right?
I think in your first slide or second slide, you mentioned some bullet mentions the AI. So with the technology development regarding the AI, it seems to me everybody can carry a financial advisor with them. So is it still necessary to get a formal, education?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, you need to be able to ask the right question, right? And it's the same thing about financial advisor, right? I mean, if we have financial advisor, why do we need financial literacy? It turns out that the people who use financial advisor are those with high financial literacy. And I would like to argue that the people who most benefit from financial advisor are those with high financial literacy. And I think the same is going to be true for ChatGPT. I haven't done the study, but I'll tell you of something we have found. But I think, again, if you don't ask the right question, you might be led to the wrong answer. At the end, artificial intelligence is artificial, right? And so, you could also have a financial advisor right now, but again, you need to have at least that basics, right? The basics, I think, doesn't go away, right? You probably might not be, you might not have to be financially sophisticated, but then you have to be able to really use well all of this information and in your favor. We have looked at the use of fintech, and we found, to our surprise, that fintech is disproportionately used with those with low financial literacy. They might think, well, now it's fintech, so it's great, and it's unfortunately not useful. The people who use fintech, even for keeping the budget and so on, they do worse. Right? And might be, and this is not causal, so I cannot assess causality, but we were very surprised of these findings. And it might just be that people who select to use fintech, which by the way were disproportionately African Americans, so they might have been targeted as well by some of they use basically this is method of payments mostly. We found that it doesn't help them, right? Again, and it's a bit consistent, frankly, with also, I live in Silicon Valley, and I think, this is really great, but I think the people who are benefited the most from the fintech are the people who invented fintech, right? More than the users so far. So I hope the wealth will really spread, right? And it's going to be helpful to people. Yeah. I'm going to keep you here forever, by the way, just in case it wasn't clear, right?
Yeah, but first, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I guess I should have brought my children here to listen to this.
Yeah.
So you showed us multiple ways where financial literacy actually makes a difference. I wonder if you have tried to quantify it over a long period of time, saying, here's our projection for how moving from the lowest level to the highest level, from the second lowest to the second highest, how much it would contribute over a period of 30 years, prime age, to actually wealth. Or maybe if you look at the cost of not being good, did you try to do that? I could see, for example, decisions.
In our JP a little bit, but it's hard to do it because again, it's not a general equilibrium, right? So you have to really have a general equilibrium model because when this happens, everything in the economy changes, right? It is so substantial.
That 30 to 40% number mentioned in the beginning
Is partial equilibrium.
partially good, and that would amount to roughly, if you were to give it a dollar amount, that would be in the tens of thousands.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I'm only talking about inequality, right? So I'm not talking about how much one person will benefit, right? And this is also a rational model, so nobody makes mistakes, right? I think, I have to say the people who have attempted to kind of find the cost of mistake is really hard to do. It's really hard to do precisely. And I think, to do it well, you have to do a general equilibrium because once you change the aggregate economy, many other things will change. But I agree with you, this is the missing piece, right? And also it's the missing piece for policymaker, because policymaker want to know, right? Okay, if I do this, what's the benefit, right? One of the things that we have really seen, the policymaker have really responded to crisis, right? And this is why, by the way, financial literacy, I've worked on financial literacy 25 years, and my first 5 years of my first, 10 years were so miserable. I would go to conferences and people were looking at me, feeling like, what is this stuff? I remember this distinctive one conference, this is for you young researcher. Where I presented, this was a macro conference in front of all these macro University of Chicago economists, and there was this one super famous professor who shook his head the entire presentation, right? So it was super tough because no one thought this was relevant. People thought it was a sideshow. And with the financial crisis, people start paying attention. With the inflation, even central bank are paying attention, right? So I think there we can see a sense that there are costs. That it's not true that, people, because it's important, they will find a way to do it, right? Because if you don't know anything about finance, it's really hard to get the best mortgage, right?
And maybe just to kind of follow up on that, what you showed us about mortgages is that expand what they say or expose what they do?
Right, no, here is just a statement about, and it's not a statement about themselves, it's what is the, things to do. So it's even better in a sense, this is an assessment, but we have studied behavior too, right? And that's why we want to study not just intention, but behavior, right? So I've only shown you the precautionary saving, but we have also studied whether, people with higher financial literacy, for example, invest in the stock market, insure more, borrow less, and so on, and this is true. So I do think that when we start summing up these costs, they are probably quite high. If you sum up the cost of the financial crisis, I'm not arguing that financial literacy was only the reason, right? But clearly people with low financial literacy disproportionately engage in the, bad mortgages. the cost was enormous, you know, and we are seeing, you know, huge cost to the economy collapsed, right? So I think, you know, in a sense, I would like to argue that the costs are not likely to be small. And I, you know, might leave it like that, you know, not a clear figure, but I don't think this is a sideshow. And to conclude, you know, if you can take a course on personal finance, here we have two great professors, so take the opportunity to do so, because otherwise you're going to spend 8 hours each week dealing with your personal finances, okay, rather than playing at the beach.
I was wondering if there were any specific things that you think a course in financial literacy or personal finance should have that would make it most influential on students of any age, or like make it have the most long-lasting impact that they would remember it as they.
Well, we hope that, you know, in a sense, you have to cover specific topics, right? And so, you know, I see a lot of personal finance courses, and I feel like, what is this stuff? You know, a lot of personal finance courses, by the way, are about investing, right? And that's not the only decision you have to make, right? In fact, I'm going to argue, pay off your credit card debt. I don't know of any stock that give you a 25% interest rate, risk-free, right? So there are really, you know, better way to invest than just invest in stocks. But perhaps your question was about how can we make it attractive, really, to the student? How can we make it memorable and so on? This is probably why the student prefer TikTok to the professor, right, or things like this. But the reality is this is a complex topic, right? And so don't trust too much people who are your age and don't have any probably PhD in economics, right? And, you know, give you great advice. By the way, a lot of journalists call me because they want tips, right? So what is the best tip for this? And so my answer, I have to give the tip, right? Because otherwise somebody else will give a tip, but I always have these things. I am allergic to tips because personal finance is too important to just follow tips.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really true. I'm pretty sure that if I give you these general tips, you will not remember it. So I hope what will be memorable is, you know, the lesson, you know, like the all of the calculation that you go through. So then actually, you know, you can make those decisions yourself, right? So when you buy a car, you'll be able, you know, before you go to the car dealer, to actually check what the different interest rate, you know, would amount for your payment. When you go and, you know, do a mortgage, you can do the calculation yourself, right? So I know that this might not be as memorable and sexy, but, you know, hopefully, you know, something that will help students. Is it time for the reception? Okay.